Today, I'm here to introduce you to one of the most important media figures of the 20th century that you've never heard of. His name is Bob Brown, and his CV puts most people's in this room, with all due respect, to shame. He was, at various points in his career, a best-selling pulp fiction and film writer, an inventor, an editor. He was a stockbroker. He was the owner-operator of a South American publishing empire. He was a political radical and an exile. He was also an educator, but in my field, English literary studies, he's best known as the avant-garde poet of the lost generation, American exiles who were working in various parts of France in the 20s and 30s to effect a revolution of the word. I'm not going to talk to you about Bob Brown's whole life today. Rather, I'm going to focus on the invention that dominated it, Bob Brown's reading machine. So Brown believed that if you revolutionized the act of reading, that you could effect a revolution of the word, which would be inklessly achieved. So Brown was profoundly frustrated that whereas in cinema, the talkies had been introduced in 1928, and that completely transformed the way that people interacted with moving images. But in the field of print production, in the field of writing and literature, technology was at a standstill. And for Brown, this was completely unsatisfactory. Film had given us the talkies. He was going to give us the readies. And this was a modern, moving word spectacle in time with our day. So his big idea, really, was that there was a convergence happening between literary experiment and technological experiment. A machine could unite these two moments of culture and produce a complete transformation in our media landscape. People could carry entire libraries of information around with them and use that knowledge to effect social change. So what was the magic device that was going to do all this? Well, that was the reading machine. That's this slightly ramshackle contraption you can see up here. This is a prototype that he built with the American expatriate artist Ross Saunders in 1930 to 1931. And the machine itself was a fairly simple idea. It's a form of machine-assisted speed reading that would allow you to devour an entire 100,000-word novel in a single sitting. That might have been a bit ambitious. What this machine did, though, was very basically that. It had, at the top here, a little enclosure where a gramophone motor was stored. It drove two reels here, which he pilfered from some stock market tickers. On those reels was a medium, in this case probably paper, but he imagined something akin to microfilm, where you had micrographically printed text that would stream up through an aperture here, across a reading screen that would magnify that miniature text and bring it up to a comfortable reading size. The take-up reel would return the readie to its pillbox-like container. You pop it in the enclosure here, and off you go. You've revolutionized the word. So, because of Brown's association with the Dada movement, a lot of scholars think that this machine probably never really worked, and what's more, it was never really intended to work. It was a conceptual piece designed to challenge our ideas about what reading was and what it could do. And I happen to agree with that to a point. However, I think that functionality was really important to Bob Brown's aesthetic. I also think that the reading machine, even this prototype here, fits just as neatly into the tradition of patent models as it does into the tradition of avant-garde Dada ready-mades. So a side-by-side comparison with a Royal Portable Typewriter, state-of-the-art in 1930, gives you a real sense of the design aesthetic that they were chasing. The reels here closely correspond to the typewriter ribbons sort of dramatically showcased at the top of this unit here. And I believe that's entirely deliberate. Ross Saunders was not just an artist, he was a fully qualified engineer. He had the parts, he had the chops to build this thing and to make it work. So my sense of this device was that, yes, it did work. It was part of a revolution in consumer information technology that was sweeping the marketplace around this time. But that is only scratching the surface of what they thought this machine could do. Here, Saunders sketched out a prototype that looks eerily like a laptop computer. And it's no coincidence that Brown is today known as the godfather of the e-reader. The mechanism is again very similar. You've got your reedy reels here, you've got your reading screen up here, and you pop open the lid to load in the Reedy's medium, and boom, off you go. You've got a laptop microfilm reader in 1930. But again, this is a very simple machine-assisted speed reading design. Brown's ambition for this vastly exceeded it. He imagined a media ecology that would allow you to completely revolutionize what you could do with language, as well as make it more efficient. But how is he going to achieve this? Who is he going to get to help showcase this new language? Well, as it turns out, he knew a few famous modernists, including Gertrude Stein, Ezra Pound, the founder of the Italian futurist movement, F.T. Marinetti, as well as the American doctor-poet William Carlos Williams. And together, they helped Brown imagine what this new reading medium could do and what it would look like. The book was called Reedy's for Bob Brown's Machine. It was an anthology that looked like just about any other book, printed with standard printing equipment. But the results were nothing like a standard text. And this is what they looked like. Here, Brown's writing about another poet who engaged with printing technology, Stephen Crane, whose typewritten black riders galloped across blank pages. And he writes here, Stephen Crane's black riders crash by hell-bent for leather, uppercase, lowercase, both together, chanting valorously, print in action at long last, movable type at breakneck gallop. So the pace of the Reedy's immediately brings to mind the speed reading effect, which Brown achieves by removing many direct articles, conjunctions, other elements of language that he thought were superfluous. Except he doesn't entirely do away with them. Using his weapon of choice, the dash, he suggests their presence while also creating an illusion of forward motion. Again, this is only a prototype. He imagines that the Reedy's could do a lot more than that. For example, he imagined that the reading medium could become a three-dimensional process that you could interact with. Birds of words with a light chirping on his hands in a kind of vision of early augmented reality where you could manipulate electronic text with your bare hands. Again, the modernist writers helped him create this invention. And he imagined also that using emoticons, or early versions of emoticons, could help expand the vocabulary of the written word as well as compress it. And he was right. This is exactly the direction that many forms of electronic communication took today, including text messaging and the Twitter sphere. And he was so right so often because he associated with a lot of leading innovations in the day, including hands-free interfaces. The theremin had just been invented in 1928. So why not, instead of waving your hands in front of antenna to produce spooky sci-fi music, why not instead control your reading machine with that in an early form of gesture control interface? And what if you want to read at night? Well, newly available radioactive materials could allow printing in radium ink. I cannot see a downside there. One of the most important innovations that Brown had, however, was the engagement with the television. He imagined televistic Reedy's. Reading matter, he predicted, will be radioed, and words eventually will be recorded directly onto the palpitating ether. So he's imagining a wireless network, a hyperlinked database that users could stream directly to their portable device, an extraordinary prediction of exactly the future direction that this technology would take. He also conflated a technological device with a publishing platform, bypassing the censor in the process. Now, this produced some extraordinary avant-garde writing, the likes of which would not be seen until the 1960s and 70s. But it also produced the 1930s equivalent of trolling, where extraordinary rants, using shocking language even for the day, were produced alongside these modernist masterpieces. Brown's media environment facilitated both approaches. Unfortunately, the reading machine was a little too far ahead of its time. Some of the parts just wouldn't work, including the translucent medium. Also, the stock market crash, the final one of 1932, really did depress the financial prospects for building a new high-risk piece of technology like this. So the story goes that the revolution of the word ended here. All the expatriates went back home to America, their tails between their legs, and the revolution of the word slowly died. And along with it, the reading machine, which, after a last-ditch attempt to sell it to the Russians, Bob Brown and his wife Rose eventually abandoned. Except that that's not completely true. What actually happened was that they returned to New York and reevaluated their entire careers. They decided that instead of using the reading machine as a kind of avant-garde experiment, or even a get-rich-quick scheme, they decided to transform it into an instrument for social change because they had become committed socialist activists who, like many writers of the day, eventually joined the Communist Party. And they reimagined the reading machine as a device that would provide libraries of information for workers in order to help ferment the kind of social change that they felt Depression-era America desperately needed. They also worked with some of the leading designers of the new microfilm technology that was coming onto the market in the mid-30s. However, their politics put them completely at odds with the direction the field was going, where the industry was producing gigantic machines that cost a fortune and only major corporations and libraries could afford. The Browns insisted on keeping the information cheap, accessible, and portable, mobile. So it might be now that the Browns' time has finally come. His biographer, Craig Saper, has produced an online version of the Readies, which allows you to view the original Readies anthology at readies.org as Brown originally imagined it. At Oxford Brookes University, the Avant-Gardes and Speculative Technology Project, which includes myself, my colleagues Friedel Wild, and John Twycross, have really taken up Bob Brown's speculative technology ideas and created an augmented reality reading machine where texts erupt from landscapes in Oxfordshire. And working with the experimental writer Ian Sinclair, we've attempted to hack the language that various organizations use in the city to dominate it and to divide it. So by playfully but seriously subverting that language, we're attempting to challenge those kind of discourses. And following Bob Brown's trajectory, we're now transforming that avant-garde experiment into a potential tool for social change. So we've reached out to a number of youth groups in Oxford who represent marginalized communities. And together with maker groups based at Oxford County Libraries, we're building augmented reality reading machines together. So our attempt here is to write our community into these narratives, to write through and around them using technology that these groups are in control of. And so we think this is the kind of project that Brown might have envisaged when he originally designed the Readies. We hope that we are together with our community challenging the impulse to sleepwalk into a new media ecology that's just around the corner. And one of the lessons we've all learned from building these new augmented reality reading machines is that the future's future is sometimes in the past. Thanks very much.